Welcome, I'll be reviewing Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 4. Since La'an is my favorite character, I got a little bit excited when I heard her voice in the ship's log. And it was a beautiful surprise to have this be basically a Memorial Day episode. Remembrance Day, technically, on Star Trek. I really enjoyed getting to see her drawer contents. That shows a lot about a person. She seems to enjoy collecting rocks and twigs like I do, plus jewelry, maybe from her family. I would love to know the stories behind it. Can we have a Star Trek drawers episode where we just go through everybody's stuff? It was an intriguing idea of having people wearing the insignia of their past ships, and it was so much fun kind of looking at everybody and going, ooh, what pin are you wearing? I thought it was just a lovely touch how at the beginning of the episode, La'an couldn't bring herself to put on the Puget Sound pin. She hadn't processed it, she was still dealing with the trauma, and at the end, we see her take the insignia and put it on. Really nice book ending there from a story perspective. Communications satellite is destroyed. That can mean only one thing. Someone is trying to start a sneak attack. No assumptions until we gather more intel. Pike, are you personally calling me out? The first reaction I had was, who is it? Is it the Gorn? Is it the Klingons? I started getting some serious Resident Evil vibes from the abandoned colony, with the dark lighting and that dog jumping out of nowhere. That totally got me, by the way. If Paramount allowed me to react to Star Trek, I would have been like, Pike believed the survivor really quickly when she was like, the hull is transport resistant. I would have been all, is it now? Let's look into that. I didn't even see them run a scan to make sure she was telling the truth. But maybe they did that in the background and would have said something if it came up negative. I still think that Pike is just too good for this world, and someday that's going to get them into trouble. It is a really good thing that he has La'an with him to be like, oh no, we're putting shields up, Captain. This is very suspicious. I think the little girl, Fig, reminded the lieutenant of herself at that age when the Gorn came. And I really appreciated that she gave credence to the kid who was just ranting about monsters. The other adults were all, ugh, it doesn't mean anything. She's just scared. Don't worry about it. But La'an stopped to listen and said, wait, let's hear what she has to say. What an opening. It might have been one of the more engaging ones that Star Trek has had for a while. It's also the first time that I've been on board with the intro music. It always felt just too out of touch melodramatic before, but for this storyline with the Gorn, I'm like, yes, it fits. The scope feels right. The directing style was intriguing as well, the way La'an was completely disoriented after the Enterprise was hit. So the camera went in and out of focus, people were slightly distorted in her vision and therefore our vision. I thought that was really well done. The captain really shone here as well. He was staying calm, trusting the experts on his crew, and making swift decisions based on their recommendations. To me, that's the sign of a true leader who remains confident and trusting his people rather than just kind of shouting orders to seem like they're in control. I really like Pike. The poor doctor, though, 9 casualties in like 4 minutes and no way to synthesize more supplies. I kind of enjoyed the dig at archaeological medicine, as in our era. It reminded me a little bit of Bones in The Voyage Home when he's like running around the hospital going, what is this, the Dark Ages? I forget his exact line, but it was pretty funny.
Dialysis. My God, what is this, the Dark Ages?
They were also doing a great job of pacing between locations. The bridge, sickbay, engineering, and then the main plot thread being La'an dealing with the Gorn again. She seriously scared me with that speech of hers, by the way. Talk about intense. We are prey. The enemy doesn't care about my feelings. I love her so much. Also, kudos to the writers for never showing us the Gorn. I think that was far more effective that we never saw them. It also explains the TOS encounter a little bit more. Good job, writers. Then Pike came in there quietly and took her aside to say, look, bluntness is fine, but hope and belief can sometimes mean the difference between victory and defeat. I think he sees her truly as his kind of backup first officer, as we saw in this episode. She's still very young, trying to find her footing, and I like that Pike is going, I see a lot of potential in you. Let's get you to the point where you can be a first officer truly and really step into that role. Maybe not on this ship, but on a ship somewhere. Then we started getting into some old school silent running. Oh, I got a little bit too excited when this happened. Those beeps from, I think it was the red alert, but they sounded eerily like sonar pings. And I think that was a deliberate choice to evoke the feeling of being on a submarine in this sequence. Between that and the arming torpedoes lines going on, this felt like a World War II submarine movie. Or a more modern one, like The Hunt for Red October.
Torpedo impact now, 40 seconds. 35 seconds.
And in the end, the Enterprise basically depth-charged the Gorn. Well, one of their ships. Speaking of which, let's talk ship designs. Am I the only one that was like, that looks like a Canar bottle, but glowing? Doesn't it? Just me? Okay. I could also see those ships in a contemporary sculpture garden. We also saw Pike putting a lot of faith in the Enterprise. Multiple times he was like, I believe in her. She can take it. When everyone was like, yeah, the hull is going to breach and we're all just gonna die. But he was like, no, we're going deeper into the brown dwarf. Also, now I know this episode was inspired by subs. We are literally referencing diving, and the hull is buckling like sea pressure. Someone in the writer's room had recently watched a film like The Enemy Below, Run Silent, Run Deep. Love that one, by the way. Or Das Boot, which is just an artistic masterpiece and so sad at the end. I absolutely adore submarines. When I was a kid, I was so obsessed that it was actually my first research paper. I was like 6 or 7, barely knew how to read. I went to the library with my mom and she helped me photocopy photographs out of history books. This was the 80s, okay? We were old school. And I wrote up a whole article on the history of submarines, going back to the Civil War. That just goes to show how obsessed I am with them. I would spend hours and hours watching submarine documentaries.
This is an all-hands drill. The Rickover is going to sneak up on a hostile surface ship and sink her.
My parents were completely tired of it. The good thing is, if they wanted me to sit down and be quiet for like 3 hours, they would put on, say, The Hunt for Red October. Now, this also might have just been a reference to Wrath of Khan, but I like my theory better, that it's more about subs. But I mean, one could argue that Wrath of Khan was inspired by that as well, which then inspired this, which inspired it back to... Never mind. Nurse Chapel reminded me a bit of Claire from Outlander here. She was basically tossed into the tech of an earlier century and was doing her best with it, like the actual sewing up of wounds. Now I want a crossover episode with Claire and Nurse Chapel just off doing time medical shenanigans. Maybe with the doctor. Instead of Super Hulock, it would be Strange Hulander? And then mind melding right into deep trauma like that. Honestly, if I were Spock, I probably would not have agreed to it. I don't want to see that. Thank you. And there was a nice callback moment to Michael there as well. The idea that mind melds do kind of go both ways, and La'an was able to sense that, and she could feel his buried pain. So far, Strange New Worlds is balancing old Trek with new Trek fairly well. It's kind of like a fusion of the two, or a bridge, living in kind of the space between. like the Descendants song. You can find me in the space between when two worlds come to meet. You'll never be out of reach. We can meet in the space between. And that's really how I feel about Strange New Worlds. At first, the Hemmer and Uhura scenes were relatively relaxing compared to the rest of their ship. They're just kind of bantering back and forth. And then just at the right time, they ramped up the tension and put them in immediate jeopardy so that at the end of the episode, they were the main focus, which was really an interesting switch. Meanwhile, while discussing the slingshot maneuver, Spock basically pointed out that doing so would give the Gorn an attack of opportunity, and I feel like that was a deliberate little wink to the D&D fans out there. She'll hold. Pike is really just assuming miracles out of the Enterprise. I guess he figures they'll be fine since he dies later, but he's putting an awful lot of faith in that, especially when we know timelines can be changed. I noticed that La'an took his previous lesson to heart, because even though what he was saying was a little bit ridiculous, she confidently backed him up and was like, yeah, we'll hold. It'll be fine. We can do this. This was such a fun episode. The show is getting better and better. Plus, what we really saw shining this episode was teamwork and coming together as a crew. And the Enterprise was certainly the worse for wear at the end of this episode. Yikes. Maybe next week we'll get a refit dry dock episode. Those are always interesting. Overall, I thought this was a really touching tribute to Memorial Day. Well-timed, well-executed. I just love this show. It's fantastic. I think this might be my favorite Star Trek after Deep Space Nine. If they can keep up this pace and decent writing, acting, production design, it's just so satisfying as a Star Trek fan.